In 2016, Donald Trump won the presidential election against Hillary Clinton. The vote was close, and he won by only 80 votes, but the 80-vote margin he held was not that of average citizens. It was 80 Electoral College votes. Most people have heard of the Electoral College, but very few understand it. In fact, according to an article by Christina Villegas, civic knowledge surveys reveal that a large percentage of the American public is unfamiliar with the process and how it operates, yet a majority of registered members of both major parties overtly favor eliminating the system. So why do so many people want to get rid of a system they don't understand? The Electoral College system is complicated and flawed, both structurally and in its fundamental threat to democracy. It was established by the Founding Fathers to elect the President and Vice President. The system was a compromise between a fully popular vote and an election by Congress, since both methods raised concern from state delegates. The qualifications for electors are laid out in the Constitution, which states that electors may not be representatives, senators, or persons holding an office of trust or profit, but no other guidelines are given. This leaves the election process up to individual states. A total of 538 electors, representing the 100 senators, 435 members of the House, and 3 representatives for D.C., are responsible for choosing the president and vice president. Each state has a set number of electors allowed. Complete sets of electors, one for each presidential candidate, are chosen by the party they pledge to vote for. In many cases, electors are chosen based on their service to their party. When the voting population of a state chooses who they want the president to be, the electors who have pledged to vote for that presidential candidate are selected to represent the state. These electors vote after the general election for the president and vice president. This type of election leads to several structural offenses, such as an electoral college misfire and the procedure for an occasion when a majority of electoral votes isn't reached. An electoral college misfire is what happens when the majority of electoral votes go to a candidate not chosen by the popular vote. This has happened 4 times in history, most recently in the 2016 election. When the candidate chosen by the Electoral College is not the candidate chosen by the popular vote, a significant amount of social unrest is created. The Electoral College misfire also calls into question the undemocratic nature of the Electoral College. Democracy, by definition, indicates that all eligible members of the population are in charge of choosing their representation. By using the Electoral College instead of other means of election, only a few members of the population are choosing the president and vice president. When a majority of electoral votes is not awarded to either candidate, there is a very specific procedure for determining the president and vice president. The 12th Amendment states the presidential election is determined by the House of Representatives and the vice president is determined by the Senate. In this type of election, each state casts 1 vote in the House of Representatives, and each senator casts 1 vote in the Senate. This removes the voting power from Washington, D.C. entirely because D.C. doesn't have voting representation in the House or Senate. This process is also problematic because the representatives in the House and Senate were not chosen by their constituents to represent the state in a presidential election. The representatives were voted into office to introduce and vote on bills and to serve on committees, among other things. Support for the Electoral College lies in the idea that it reduces fraud due to the easily controlled number of votes being cast and monitored, as well as the idea the system has been put in place for so long that there may not be a need to change it at all. However, many other countries, as well as local and state elections in the U.S., don't use the Electoral College system, and yet are not fraudulent elections. And the Electoral College system has been in place for many years, but it has yielded elections where the popular vote and the electoral vote disagreed, and elections where the Senate and House had to determine the winners. In these elections, the electoral system did not work as designed, and it could continue to happen in the future. Despite the few reasons supporters cite to keep the Electoral College, the system is still flawed. Starting with the general complexity of the system that leads to many registered voters not understanding how it works, to the multitude of structural flaws, including the Electoral College misfire and the possibility of a majority not being reached. The Electoral College has deemed itself an archaic system in need of reform. It is riddled with imperfections and challenges the idea of a democratic election.